Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. Get started in a minute. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today. This is our third meeting in the Resource and Funding Engagement Series. We're recording the meeting, as you know, so we will post this on the website after the meeting, along with the meeting materials. Thanks for joining. We'll get started in just a second. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started in just a second. We had about 140 people register, so we'll give another couple minutes here for people to join. And appreciate you joining us today for our third meeting in the OHCS Resource and Funding Engagement Series. We will get started with some polls in a second, but while we're waiting, I thought it would be fun to do a little warm-up. So we will do a raise your hand if a couple of questions. So raise your hand if you have a college age student getting ready to head off next week to school. I have a college age student heading off next week, and I don't see any other hands. I see, oh, Glenn, you share that in common. I know we're very ready at our house, a couple people raising their hands. So it's very exciting. We're very, very ready for that next week. It's very late in the season, but and another selfish question: is anyone suffering from fall allergies right now, or am I alone? Jacqueline, okay, good, I'm not alone. All right, Jessica, Heather, I think I'm allergic to fall. That's what I am kind of going with here. Zachary, yeah, it's really bad. So apologies for maybe some issues with allergies, but all right, thanks all for the little warm up. We got 71 here, so and it's 3 after, so we'll go ahead and get started, even though Carolyn's still letting folks in. Thank you all for joining, and Carolyn, if you can advance to the next slide. All right, thank you. All right, as I said, large group here, so it's helpful for us if you can rename your Zoom box to include your name and organization. That way we can see who you are, your peers can know who you are as well. So appreciate you doing that. And while we're still letting folks in, we're gonna go ahead and see who is in the room today. So we'll do a poll, a geographic type of poll here. So please select the area you represent or where you do most of your work. Got the poll going here. So please select the area you represent or where you do most of your work. Give it another 30 seconds to let folks answer the poll. All right. So we've got a lot of folks statewide, which is great. So bring that perspective in, and a lot of folks from the Portland metro area, and then split out among rural and urban Oregon. All right, and we will go ahead and do another poll. If I can end this. End that. Okay. Thanks a lot for your participation in these polls. It's helpful for us. And this one is, we've got a lot of topics that we're addressing here today. So as you come into the meeting thinking, what are you most interested in learning about of the topics that we've got today? So it's okay to be unsure as well, because you're going to hear some information in the main session and then have some opportunity to dig into these topics a little further in breakout rooms. So today, I'm most interested in learning about DEI agreement, pre-qualification, pre-development, loan guarantees, or unsure. Got about half folks responding here, so we'll give it another 30 seconds or so and let you respond to the poll. Got about 80 folks here today. I think we're still expecting over 100, so folks will likely join in throughout the meeting. Okay, let's see. All right. Can you all see the poll results? Over half of us here are interested in pre-development. So Mitch, you ready for that? And, a good portion of folks that are also interested in pre-qualification, which is great. And, 16% are unsure. I get that. And again, you'll learn more about most of these topics in the main session. And we're hoping to have a balanced set of breakout rooms this afternoon, later when we move into breakout rooms. So we would like folks to self-select into breakout rooms, but we may need to do some adjustments so we don't have everyone in the pre-development room. So just something to be aware of there. But thank you very much for letting us know what you're here for. So with that, let's advance to the next slide, please, Carolyn. Okay, so how we'll spend the next couple hours. As I mentioned, we will have topic presentations. So we'll spend some time in the main session learning, overview of the topic presentations. So those of you who are unsure about what you're most interested in, you'll have a chance to hear a brief overview of the key topics. Then we'll pause for a minute to take some clarifying questions, so that you feel prepared to discuss in smaller groups. There'll still be large breakout rooms because we've got a good amount of people here, but so that you can go into topic-specific rooms. We'd like, if you can, think about the questions you can kind of save until we get to clarifying questions, or use the Q&A function, and we will get to those questions as we can. As you know, we're recording this main session. We're also going to be recording the breakout sessions. You'll have about 30 to 35 minutes, depending on how things go in the breakout rooms. We'll then come back to the large group and close out with next steps. So we are just having one topic in a breakout room, so you'll be selecting that, and hopefully we're going to record in the breakout rooms, fingers crossed, because had some challenges with Zoom, but the idea is to record the breakout rooms so you're able to view the discussions that you're not able to attend, because you'll just be able to attend one breakout session for today. All right, I think with that, we'll move on to the next slide, Carolyn, and talk about our process agreements. So as your facilitator, and by the way, my name is Kim Travis. I didn't even introduce myself at the beginning. I'm a community engagement specialist with OHCS and helping to facilitate this meeting series. with the Affordable Rental Housing Division. So as the facilitator here, really trying to help foster an inclusive environment, we've been working with a group called the Center for Equity and Inclusion. So OHCS leadership has been doing some intensive training, and we're bringing these process agreements into many of our workspaces as we acknowledge white supremacy culture and how to improve our working relationships and hold each other accountable to these agreements. So we are practicing in this space with you, with each other, and ask that that you practice as well. Believe there's benefit to really as much as we can helping to foster an inclusive environment and follow some of these principles. And certainly the what is that, the fifth bullet here, being willing to do things differently and experience discomfort is something that is really part of why we're here, really, to do things differently within the Affordable Rental Housing Division and some of our funding processes. And we want to build the best possible process as a state agency, a state housing and finance agency. We're striving for excellence together with you. And so thinking about how we can do things differently together. The last bullet here, expect and accept non-closure, can be hard. I think we often want all the answers today, and we want certainty today, but we may not get that. And it's often hard to trust the process, especially if maybe you felt unheard by OHCS in the past. So acknowledging that, there's times when you've provided feedback and we haven't heard that or adopted that, but we're here now, we're fully engaged, and really this is the time for us to be thinking about how we can look at the way we do business and how we work with you and design the best possible process that we can to meet our needs. So wanting to just share those, and hopefully you're able to adopt some of those principles as you work in these meeting spaces with us. Okay, with that, I think we're ready to shift over and dig into some content. We've got a lot of content today, a lot of materials to review. So with that, I think we'll shift next slide and shift to Natasha.
Thank you, Kim. This is Natasha Detweiler-Davy, OHCS. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Affordable Rental Housing here at OHCS. I appreciate everybody being here today. We have a lot of topics. These loan guarantee programs are a couple that we don't tend to spend a lot of in session time discussing. So have put our tiny links to them. Those are also available on our primary engagement page. And I think I will just ask if Mitch can just spend a couple minutes framing up what you will find in that content, and maybe more ways to provide feedback that will be included in survey and other follow-up from today, but also expect future convenings or rules committees to finalize these different loan guarantee structures. So I think I'll hand it to Mitch.
Thanks, Natasha. Hi, everyone. Mitch Hanush. I'm the Senior Policy Analyst for the Affordable Rental Housing Division at OHCS. Thanks for being with us today. So as Natasha mentioned, these are two separate programs that OHCS wanted feedback on. The Permanent Loan Guarantee Program is the sort of defunct OHCS program that is being relaunched. There was statutory updates done in 2019. With the COVID response, this was kind of put on the back burner, but we are relaunching the process. We had done a RAC and have done some kind of off and on engagement since 2019 and have made a lot of updates to the program. There is a program manual at this link, a proposed draft program manual, as well as draft rules. This is a program that will be run by OHCS, so please give those a read, provide any kind of programmatic input you have. Once we get this feedback, I think the plan is we'll go to a rules process, hope to get that into the Secretary of State bulletin in the next couple months, which will allow for folks to provide public comment through that period as well on that rules draft. There will be a public hearing that you can come to and attend and provide feedback that way. And then we're really hoping we can get this program launched early next year at the latest, which is exciting. The construction loan guarantee program is a separate program based on legislation that came out of this last session. We received $10 million to provide a CDFI with the ability or the provide one or more CDFIs with an award of that $10 million to stand up a construction loan guarantee program. So we will need to do an RFP process. Yes, sorry, $20 million. Thanks, Bill. And we are doing an RFP process that will allow CDFIs to come in and apply for the right to administer this program on behalf of OHCS. We're really excited about this. It is going to be administered by a third party. So the feedback we're looking for in this case is more around sort of that RFP process and what sort of some non-negotiables are, or what expectations should be for the CDFIs that are coming in. We are going to have to do a rules process for this as well. So there will be a public comment period as well as a public hearing around this for those rules. We're also asking that the CDFIs have an engagement with key stakeholders around this program before they implement it. So hopefully you can keep in the mind or keep in the loop on that as that process unveils too. So yeah, these will be ongoing processes, separate timelines. The construction loan guarantee program is probably going to be a little further out because we do have to do the RFP process, but welcome your feedback. Also, my door is open. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any kind of other feedback that you'd like to give as well. So I think that's all I got on that.
Thanks, Mitch. Go to the next slide.
Great. Thank you so much. And so I think in the context of all of the work that we're doing in transition and change, those loan guarantees are going to be some fundamental pieces of kind of the full financial strategies around mitigating cost and trying to find ways to have broad benefit to project budgets with the use of those. And then I wanted to kind of regroup around all of this change that we are looking at and really seeking your input and guidance. I want to take a minute to check back in on our last engagement that we had a couple of weeks ago focusing on readiness. I want to really appreciate all of the input that folks had in our active space and follow up, providing information through to staff and various survey mechanisms and our Housing Stability Council. And so with complete gratitude for all of that. And I think that as a result, we have some really clear and direct input on that and where we need to make sure that our process is providing the needed earlier assurances before we do that final funding commitment. Again, wanting that final funding commitment to be later in the process. So we are prioritizing our resources to be deployed into community, limiting the risk of cost escalation, but also being able to support and sustain projects before then. Some of the programs that we're talking about here today are really directly connected with that, and where those lines get established with the clear need for us to be able to have a pre-development resource that is working to foster, build, and sustain an ongoing pipeline of projects coming through, getting ready to move forward. And again, just all with these intent underneath this broad umbrella of the Executive Order 2304 on production, the incredible investment from our state legislature and GAP resources to make sure that we can really do this foundational work to build and expand affordable housing across the state. and with the idea that we need to be moving all of our resources into a system that is able to be used in a more flexible capacity to be able to offer resources in a mix of ways, whether those are layering different resources together that we might not have deliberately offered in the same package before, identifying what resources we might have to offer under a non-competitive structure, what resources do we have under competitive. So really wanting to build this application structure that can balance all of those pieces. Today's conversation topic focusing on pre-development, pre-qualification, and the DEI agreement are all really big pieces of making this whole new structure work. Obviously, pre-development resources, we had $9.7 million investment from the legislature, and really hoping to funnel and use those resources to make a deliberate impact for those lesser resource, culturally specific organizations that are doing that work and don't have resources to sustain getting as far to ready as we will be looking for. And then also in the like really redesigning our application process to build in a pre-qualification process. And I think this is something where, if I'm thinking about it, is generally in our competitive NOFA process, notice of funding availability process, we have thresholds around development team capacity. And this is really trying to pull that assessment outside of the transaction of one project application to be able to look at organizations and say, we want to give you clarity in advance of submitting an application if there are any concerns around whether you have the experience or expertise to be able, it's really experience to be able to do the transaction that you're looking for. And that might mean, do you have tax credit experience on your team? Do you have PSH experience on your team? And so we'll really dig into that conversation today. But again, with this idea that we're looking at being able to provide that single signal early and be able to have a clear list of those that have been pre-qualified to participate. And not have that pressure be tied to the project application itself. In a similar way, moving the DEI agreement outside of that transaction of one project, but instead finding ways to make sure that our commitment to equity and racial justice work within OHCS and within our work of OHCS is really intentionally working to show impact. And we have over the years done different changes over time to really figure out how we want to blend and have our resources speak to our policy values around equity and racial justice. And so some of those are specific to projects, which is specific to how is each particular project working to engage, center, and prioritize serving historically underserved populations, BIPOC populations in community, and really intentionally prioritize and center that work within project concept, design, partnerships, financial connections. And then there is this idea of the DEI agreement, which we have tied to project applications, but is really about each of your organizations and wanting to have understanding and awareness that your organizations are also engaging in the work of equity. And every organization is in a different step and in a different place. And the idea is that we want to make sure that there is, no matter where you are in terms of, sophistication and strategies around equity and racial justice within your organizations, is that wherever you are, there is progress, there is deliberate action being taken to change over time and to have affirmative policies and staffing processes and training opportunities and financial benefit to BIPOC populations. And so this DEI agreement, I think, was a really exciting transition point where, again, trying to take this out of the transactional project space, bringing it into an organizational space, and then establishing a regular cadence of updates. And again, not with a stick, but with partnership interest. And all of these phases and all of these places really would let us also apply a capacity lens to this work to say, where over time are we seeing tremendous outcomes from this upfront work, and how can we look to find best practices? How do we support those that are not sure where to start or how to engage in this work? And none of that is going to be on a dime or incredibly swift, but it is important to us that we start to measure it, to track it, to get this really broad understanding. Because then as a system, we are trying to say that as we are kind of creating this new application structure, really supporting a pipeline, an early pipeline of projects with pre-development resources. We'll also have technical advisors on an OHCS team to help with navigation questions and understanding about kind of mitigating impacts of, where we would otherwise, as we are structured now, find these, a pro forma issue in a submitted application, which is then much more difficult to resolve to fund that project in a competitive structure. But if we have an advisor role that is able to provide that guidance early, what impact can that have to making sure that projects are able to be successfully funded as they are getting all of their ducks lined and work done to be able to move forward. So these are really three fundamental points that have really deliberate and clear connections to, again, achieving a revision to the way that we fund projects, where we are trying to be more intentionally collaborative, more intentionally clear about what our needs and expectations are, so that we can really create a system where we are moving forward with projects that are going to be able to be funded, and focusing a little bit, I'm hoping a little bit less on just the competition and just the idea of if you aren't in that top 5% that you wouldn't be able to move forward. So we want to make all of these projects fundable, and really build a precedent and a practice of being able to do that, and hopefully demonstrating impact of all of this, all of your incredible work in communities, to our legislature to continue the scale of investment, which is really truly needed to address need across the state. And so I think with that, I'm going to just hand it off as we'll transition into each of these three presentations before going into breakout rooms.
Awesome. Thanks, Natasha. All right. So we do have, we're right on time here. We've got 3 topic presentations, and so it's about 10:30. I expect that we'll cover the 3 presentations, and we'll be taking clarifying questions. We'll take a little pause at around 11:15 and then go into breakout rooms. So that's kind of how we're managing our time here with you. Again, lots to cover. So bear with us here over the next 45 minutes or so as we dig into these topic specific issues and opportunities, and then we'll take your questions. But again, if you have something, please use the Q&A, and our team will try to get to that throughout these presentations, or when we save your questions, and then we'll take a break at around 11:15 to do some clarifying. So, all right, with that, thanks for everything, Natasha, for your intro, and we'll jump into pre-development with Mitch. Next slide.
Thanks, Kim. And Natasha. Hi, everyone. Again, Mitch Hanush, Senior Policy Analyst for Portable Rental Housing Division. And yeah, so I'm here to talk about the pre-development program. I do want to be clear that what I will be talking about is specific to this $9.7 million investment we got from the legislature through SB 5511 in the last legislative session. Pre-development is obviously a broad concept and encompasses all the things that we're talking about today, including the loan guarantees and the DEI agreement and pre-qual. But I do want to focus in on this specific program concept, which We do have the framework on the website that hopefully you were able to look at to kind of base this on, and we will be discussing it later today too. So with that said, yes, we received $9.7 million from the latest legislative session. The language in the bill was for pre-development loans to developers of affordable housing financed through OHCS. So pretty broad, but it did specify that these need to be loans and that they need to be for affordable housing. And I think those are critical points to lay the groundwork on what we're statutorily required for here as a starting point. OHCS advocated for these funds. We through discussions, and Natasha went into this a little bit, but the discussions with the governor's office and with the legislature about sort of this new process that we're undertaking here and the increased readiness expectations that would come along with it. We acknowledge that we were going to have a need for some pre-development funding to help support partners in reaching those readiness expectations and trying to make this consolidated process work the way that we want it to work without leaving anyone behind. So this is a really key part of the puzzle, even though it is a little bit separate. So we wanted to bring it up first and foremost here, kind of in our engagement process, and get some good feedback from you all. So we will be doing the presentation today. We will have the Easy Retro board that we will take your feedback on. There is a survey that we will get your feedback through and incorporate that. There will also be future chances to provide feedback. This is very much the first draft, first chance to provide input on this. We will be sending out an iteration of this after once we've integrated the feedback from today. We will be bringing this to Housing Stability Council for an update, so keep your eyes open for that. We are going to be presenting this again, or holding space to talk about this at least at Housing Oregon conference in a couple weeks. And then there will have to be a rules process for this as well, including a rules advisory committee and public comment period and public hearing, similar to the loan guarantees I discussed earlier. So lots of space for feedback, and we welcome it. Please do send us your thoughts. And as always, again, my door is open. So please reach out if you have questions or qualifying things you want to, clarifying questions you want to get out of the way too. Next slide. So with that, I wanted to sort of start with what our goals for the program are, things that we see as sort of starting points, visions for how this program is going to function. I think first, we really want to support our partners in an impactful and equitable manner. Impactful in that we want these funds to be used for costs that are not otherwise going to be able to be paid for. We want this to fill a gap. We want it to meet a need. We don't want it to be redundant. We don't want it to be not particularly useful to folks. So we want to make sure that the amount of funding is calibrated correctly, the uses that it's eligible for are calibrated correctly, and that folks are able to access it in a way that allows them to use it in an effective manner, in an impactful manner. Similarly to that, we acknowledge that a lot of our partners are coming at this from a different space, and we know that these pre-development funds are limited, and we want to be able to target these funds towards those folks who are going to have the hardest time in meeting our new readiness standards. So we are elevating our readiness expectations and understand that organizations that have smaller balance sheets, are running thinner margins, are less capable of taking on risk or accessing debt in the private market, are going to be burdened disproportionately by meeting these increased readiness expectations. And this resource is designed to help mitigate that so that everybody who's coming in for funding is able to do so from an even footing. That's the point of this program, and we want to be able to stick to that and make sure that these resources are able to be used in such a manner. I also want to acknowledge that there are a large range of really great programs that are already happening in the state around pre-dev, both public and private. And we want to make sure that this program is not, again, redundant that it's not in competition with these resources, that it's not in any way watering down what these other programs are already offering. We want this to be able to complement what's happening already, be part of an ecosystem, and sort of make everything better than the sum of its parts. So we want to be able to work with our partners who are already doing this work and be able to make everybody better for it, expand the impact, and be able to help more projects pre-development funding because of that. We also want to acknowledge that $9.7 million is not enough to meet the need for all the pre-development funding that's going to be necessary in the state. As such, we want to focus on trying to make this as sustainable a resource as possible. We want to be able to hopefully revolve these loans back in to be able to expand the impact of that $9.7 million beyond the initial volume of that loan. So yeah, we want to be able to amplify it by getting money back in, being able to fund it to fund more projects, and sort of expand impact beyond that until we potentially get another investment from the legislature or something along those lines. Next slide. So with those goals in mind, and again, please do check out that framework, because I think it fleshes everything out a little more in depth and shows sort of what we're thinking. But I did want to call out a couple of the things that I think are really critical to aligning with those goals. First and foremost is this organizational eligibility piece. From an impact and an equity perspective, an equitable distribution perspective, we felt it was really important to make sure that we're able to target these resources towards those organizations that have historically had more difficulty accessing debt in the private market, might have less credit, might just have smaller balance sheets or more risks or more risk aversion or challenges in taking on that risk of reaching that readiness up front and providing that investment early. So we have limited the organizational eligibility in this initial concept to nonprofits, tribes, housing authorities, and local governments. We also, in terms of complementing existing programs, wanted to align this with our own early funding programs at OHCS. The land acquisition program and capacity building funding in particular have these organizational eligibility criteria. We really want to create an ecosystem where we're able to use all of these sort of early funding programs in concert with one another to be able to help projects come in, potentially get a LAP loan, use pre-development funding, get funded, come in, get capacity building grant, be able to hire up staff to then get to a pre-development loan to then get funded. We see a lot of potential here to be able to braid these resources, and aligning organizational eligibility seemed to make the most sense in streamlining that process. We also have broken this out into two potential products. One is a feasibility loan and one is a pre-development loan. We had many discussions with stakeholders and other folks doing this work in Oregon and around the country. And this was a model that really stood out to us as potentially worth pursuing. It's been successful in other places, and felt like something that we should pursue based on sort of our key goals, particularly around distributing these in an equitable manner and also having the greatest impact possible for the projects coming through our door. So I'll get into what these are next. If you could move to the next slide. So the feasibility loan, the concept here is we really want to be able to provide kind of a smaller targeted loan to allow folks to access and complete initial milestones for the project, things like early financial modeling, environmental testing, costs associated with gaining site control, and to do so in a really short-term, quick, fast-tracked approval process to allow folks to pay for really discrete costs up front. This will have a much lighter touch approval process and underwriting process than our larger pre-development loan structure, and allow folks to sort of gut check their project before coming in for that larger loan that could be more burdensome for these organizations. Because this is really targeted towards those folks with the greatest potential risk, and we want to make sure we're doing this program in an equitable manner, we're proposing limiting eligibility for this to just culturally specific organizations and or small rural partners, those folks who have been, historically most disinvested from and could potentially benefit the most from having this kind of easy access, quick, small product to be able to test their site and do some of these early feasibility testing on whether their project's going to work before coming back for a larger pre-development loan. The concept here would be, I think most of these projects receiving feasibility loans would be able to come back for a pre-development loan, for a full pre-development loan to access later to get sort of underway with the rest of their costs, and then hopefully come back for funding after that once they've met the readiness standards that we're elevating to. Next slide. So the standard pre-development loan project or product would be 3-year, with this again proposed terms that we're laying out here, and we do have questions later to kind of get at what you think the right kind of balance is here for some of these proposed terms and proposed uses. But what we're pitching is a generally below market interest rate loan for a 3-year period, capping it at $500,000. This was a number that, based on some conversations again with other organizations doing this type of work nationally, seemed like the right balance between impact and sustainability. We want to make sure it's enough money to be able to pay for some of these costs, but we also want to be able to extend these loans to as many projects as possible, and want to acknowledge that there are other resources out there that we want folks to be able to leverage. This seemed like a good starting point, but we are hoping to get some of your feedback on that. Concept would be balloon payment once your project gets financed, and then the payment would be recycled back into this program and more loans could be made on top of that. The list on the right is, again, just sort of compiled from lists of eligible uses from other similar programs that we were able to discuss this concept with. I think it's a good starting point, but one of the questions later is also trying to get at if you see anything missing here, any critical pre-development costs that you see in your projects that are not on this list. We really want to know up front, because there's still plenty of flexibility here, I think, on what this could potentially pay for, and we want it to be able to be meaningful. So if it's missing anything, please do let us know, and again, provide that through the survey or later today or at any point in the next several months. I think that would be really helpful for us. Next slide. So next steps, I mentioned this earlier, but we will, I do want to flag that, so this is on a slightly, I think, different track than the whole consolidated process. We're planning on trying to launch this, I think, a little sooner than the entire consolidated process gets launched, in an effort to allow folks to access these resources before we have the expectation that they're coming back for increased readiness for full funding. So we will be sharing this broadly, I think, after we are able to integrate the feedback from today. We'll update the framework, share it broadly, do some more conversations with targeted groups, and hopefully be able to extend the survey outreach broader than just the group here today. We also, again, will be bringing this to Housing Stability Council for input from them, and welcome you all to be present there too. And then there is the administrative rules process, which will allow for public comment and public hearing. I did want to flag too some of the outstanding process questions internally that OHCS is still grappling with. Part of that is an application process and what that looks like, what we would require upfront for both of these products to come in and receive the feasibility loan or the pre-development loan product. The underwriting process, similarly, we want to be able to be good stewards of public resources and make sure we're investing in projects that have a good chance to move forward while also not being overly burdensome and allowing some level of risk that might be challenging for a private lender to take on. So we're still working on that balance at the moment, but we'll be hopefully fine-tuning that and trying to get that into the next framework that we release for you all, or at least have some sort of standards that you could work off of with that. The pipeline support connection, Natasha mentioned the sort of technical assistance that we're planning to provide for folks who have projects in our pipeline. We see this as a really kind of no-brainer connection internally to allow for some type of referral process or connection point between projects in the pipeline that have been identified as needing these types of loan support for pre-development funding and either of these products. So we are actively talking about and thinking about ways that we can kind of formalize that and create some predictability and transparency on how folks will access this once they're in our pipeline. And we'll be sharing that as it comes along too. Next slide. So these are the questions that we'll be talking about later. Obviously, we can talk about more than this too, but these are the ones that we wanted to get at. They're pretty nuts and bolts. I do really want to talk through sort of if there's any gaps that you're identifying for either the feasibility loan or the pre-development loan and what they're eligible to pay for, so that we can kind of get that integrated early and think about what that looks like for us. And then want to talk through reasonable loan terms. We want this to be impactful and sustainable, but we also want to make sure that it's not causing undue burden to organizations that are needing these types of loans. We also are grappling with forgiveness options and would love to hear your thoughts on that. I think, again, it's a balance between creating a sustainable loan product that's able to help as many projects as possible, but also wanting to make sure that we're not causing harm to organizations by putting them in debt and then calling on that debt in a way that would potentially be damaging to that organization. So we are trying to think of potential situations in which forgiveness might make sense and would welcome thoughts around that. Lastly, around prioritization, we do have the specific targeted eligibility within the feasibility loan and for the products in general, but do want to think about geographic prioritization and especially sort of around those uses, and whether you all have any great thoughts around sort of specific costs for specific areas of the state that a pre-development loan would make sense to pay for, or potentially even a feasibility loan, things that would be really helpful to have that kind of quick early injection of cash to be able to pay for in a specific area of the state that maybe isn't as necessary elsewhere. Some type of breakout there, I think, would be really helpful to have a conversation about. So really excited to talk to you all later. And again, this is going to be an ongoing, I think, conversation over the next several months. So please do reach out and attend some of these feedback sessions. And yeah, I hope to see you in the breakout later. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitch. Great. So now that you've concluded your presentation, we do have a couple of questions in the chat. If maybe you could address those once you take a minute here. A great presentation, great information there, and appreciate some of the chat around and the clarification around neighborhood outreach and what that means. So I think we will pick up that thread as well, either through Mitch responding or possibly in the timeout we have for clarifying questions. So we may hold on that so we can move on to other presentations, unless Mitch, you want to do a quick address something right now live?
I would just say, that please add that to the question, to the response in the Easy Retro as something that you see as valuable. I can absolutely see that as a justifiable expense, but let's talk about it later, and we can incorporate it into the framework going forward. It's not currently called out specifically or explicitly, but again, this is a very early stage in the process, so we are hoping to hear that type of feedback from you all. So thanks. And around the feasibility loan approval, guaranteeing pre-development loan approval, there's a we can talk about that later too. But it's a great question, and I would love to be able to discuss it in the breakout room.
Awesome. Thanks, Mitch. Real quick one, is OHCS talking to local CDFIs?
Yes, we have had conversations with local CDFIs. I think we need to have more conversations with local CDFIs, and we're hoping to have some of them today, be able to provide their input. But again, we really want this to be working collaboratively with them, and being able to be complementary, instead of working in conflict with one another or redundant with one another. So we're as we kind of fine tune sort of some of these criteria and things along those lines, we'll be working hopefully hand in hand with the CDFIs that are already doing this type of work in the state, to be able to support each other and create, better than the sum of our parts is the way I've been trying to pitch it.
Great. Thanks, Mitch. All right. So we're going to move on to our next topic for today, which is pre-qualification. And I think we'll move to the next slide and turn it over to OHCS staff, Britt and Glenn.
Great. Good morning. My name is Glenn Munya, and co-facilitating this presentation with me today is my colleague.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Britt McLean, and Glenn and I are operations and policy analysts here at OHCS.
And over the next few minutes, we'll be sharing with you a potential new pre-qualification process. Slides in. All right. So the goal at OHCS would like to achieve is to create a pathway for entities to pre-qualify in order to speed up overall timeline for funding applications. The submission would happen in advance of submitting any individual project application and be a way of ensuring that development partnerships have the needed experience and are in good performance status with OHCS earlier in the process. This would help provide a more streamlined, quicker application process for projects. Also note that the pre-qualification is not a guarantee of project funding. Next slide, please.
OHCS really strives to be a top performing housing finance agency, and we're always seeking to incorporate promising national practices and innovative approaches to getting housing online more quickly and with our quality standards. When looking around at other models, we found that Minnesota offers a multifamily consolidated RFP, which includes a qualification process. Their qualification process requires every member of the development team to be deemed qualified, including the general contractor, developer, architect, service providers, the sponsor, and the management company. These development team members must renew their qualification every 12 months with Minnesota. Each request for a proposal RFP funding round and their year-round funding application requires a qualification. The qualification check is specific to the team member's work, and it includes things like checks for legal good standing, no recent convictions or lawsuits, no bankruptcies, no instances of disbarment, a strong track record of doing the specific work, a check for NWESP status, etc. Next slide, please.
For the pre-qualification forms and requirements, these are examples of what OHCS is considering for submission. Overall, we would like to see that the entity is in good standing. OHCS would want to ensure that standards and rules are being met and complied with by reviewing the compliance and asset ratings, as well as review financial reports to ensure that finances are in good standing. OHCS would also review the MWESB performances, as well as ensure that we have received the DEI commitment form. We would want to know whether or not if there are any involvement in active or recent litigation, as well as review the list of the entities, principals, license numbers, and overall demographics, including reviewing the developer experience and the history. If any, we would like to review the Form 8823 for non-compliance resolution. Again, these are just examples of what OHCS is considering for pre-qualification, and we welcome your feedback during the breakout session or even through the Easy Retro board, which will be available. Next slide, please.
So we're envisioning pre-qualification being a very distinct process from project readiness and pre-development resources. Pre-qualification of entities participating in affordable rental housing development would be required to pre-qualify at some early stage of the process, ensuring documentation of good standing is on record prior to partners applying for OHCS funding. Staff would maintain a system of pre-qualified entities and then would evaluate and confirm an entity's pre-qualification status and documentation at the time of application for OHCS funding. We would anticipate that organizations are able to receive a pre-qualification endorsement for gap only, as well as tax credit project types, which would require different levels of experience. Next slide, please. And lastly, in addition to your feedback during our breakout session, we have a few specific questions for your consideration. Number one, what should be evaluated to determine an entity's pre-qualification? Is there anything that we missed on that list? Second, who on the development team should be required to pre-qualify? Should it be the owner, the developer, property manager? How closely should we mirror a qualification process like Minnesota's? And third, would a pre-qualification registry updated annually be the most efficient process? Should we have an open window? Should it be on a rolling basis? So these are the specific questions that we're looking forward to talking to you about then. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you to the pre-qualification team. I think we got some question in the chat. So if you all could take a look at that while we move along to the DEI agreement. I think that would be most helpful. This is our last presentation, then we'll pause for some additional clarifying questions. So appreciate your attention and active listening and using the chat and the Q&A. It's great. So with that, we'll go to the next slide and shift over to Trinity.
Hi, everyone. My name is Trinity Kerr, and I am also an operations and policy analyst in ARH. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Agreement, updates to the actual document, and then the process. So very briefly, the current DEI agreement was introduced into the NOFA applications in 2019. This is a commitment to various internal and external organizational DEI goals. The signed DEI agreement is a threshold requirement for funding, and it has largely been archived into the NOFA application and has pretty much remained a static document. Next slide. So to transition this from a static document to a dynamic process, a couple of things have changed. So instead of putting the DEI agreement in the NOFA applications, we're proposing submitting it through a registry, a little like Britt and Glenn just talked about in the pre-qualification process. The other thing that we're changing is instead of the document being a commitment to multiple goals, we're gonna have it be in the format of a short survey where folks are asked to select DEI goals and then self-report a level on which they meet that goal. The idea is to try and encourage progress on that goal and have an update to this progress at some cadence, which we'll try to figure out and talk about in the breakout room. So this will be required for all current, meaning folks that are in application process and or in development process, as well as existing project owners, developers, and property managers. This is the phase one grouping, but we'll likely expand this out to more members of the development team later. Next slide. So the reason why we're doing this, as Natasha mentioned, is that we want to ensure that the DEI agreement has impact, that we understand where our partners and their organizations are on their goals, and also how OHCS can help support where needed or provide guidance where needed. Next slide. Thank you. So the current or the proposed DEI agreement still includes those internal and external organizational goals. The content has changed, although it is very similar. So the content is now extracted from a document called the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Benchmarks Guidebook, long title, so the GDEIB. The GDEIB organizes these DEI goals into groups, categories, benchmarks, and levels. I'll unpack that a little bit later. And it's created by the Center for Global Inclusion. So I highly recommend that you go to this website and download the GDEIB and take a look at it, because there's a lot more information that can help support what we're asking in the DEI agreement. You will have to sign in and sign a user agreement. So just note that you can't just download it without doing that. The GDEIB is a comprehensive DEI strategy guidebook. OHCS is using the GDEIB for our own internal DEI strategy, and we wanted to make sure that it was aligned with this DEI agreement. The other reason why we are aligning this is because there are lots of resources and tools to help support what we're asking to track. So as we get closer to finalizing documents and processes, we'll have a longer format discussion and training about all of this. I know this is quite express, so just note that we will have the space to go slower and understand this more. Next slide. The plan is to launch this in early 2024. Submissions will be, as I mentioned, through a web-based survey, something like Qualtrics. And another big change is that the EDI office will actually be overseeing the survey responses and will likely connect with partners upon request. Next. Okay, so in the breakout room, I am going to pull up the actual DEI agreement. I don't want to mess up this presentation by doing that here. So, but I do want to sort of show this GDEIB model, because I think it's good. It's a good visual representation of what the DEI agreement is. And so, as I mentioned, it's broken up into groups, categories, benchmarks, and levels. What you're seeing here are groups and categories. So the groups are those colored spaces. Internal, external, bridging, and foundation. And then the categories are those bullets. So as an example, in the foundation group, the categories are vision, leadership, and structure. And these are the DEI goals. Again, the GDEIB expands on what these categories are, expands on what benchmarks are related to where one might meet a goal. And so it's important that you all take a look at that. Next slide. Okay, so I said I would not share the DEI agreement, but I do want to just briefly state that it is similar to what you have seen. There is commitment language. Again, the difference is that we're asking you to select some goals and then report what level you're meeting those goals, and then eventually provide updates to any progress that you have made on those goals. Next slide. So these are the questions that are queued up in the breakout. Really, we're trying to get an understanding of what cadence is the right cadence to ask for progress, what we should be considering progress on these goals, how we can provide support to our partners, and then also what accountability looks like. I also know there are a lot of other clarifying questions. So I look forward to chatting with you all, and I'll see you in the break.
All right, thank you, Trinity. So we do have a few questions in the chat. Actually, I think one that Trinity will see if you can answer, or someone on the team about. It says, kudos for the goal of reporting on whether DEI goals are being met. Any plan to expand such a process to MWESB history of contractors? So I'm not sure if that's something that we are able to, kind of take a minute and talk through that right now, or how we want to handle that. Anyone on the team? Or we can come back to that one. And then I know we have been answering some questions along the way in the question and answer.
Sorry, Kim, my mouse disappeared. It's a good question, that MWESB question. I think we would want to probably talk with Claudia about that. And so if I could say, I'll get back to you on that. We'll put that on our.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I think that's sounds good. And then Jillian responds about MWESB a bit in the chat as well. So we'll put a pin in that as something we want to come back to and get back to folks about on that. Great. And I think we do now. It seems that there might be a bit of a thread about MWESB and COVID certification. So think that unless Natasha wants to jump in here, we will put that as a sort of parking lot question and issue, and come back at the next group session or through correspondence about that. Anything folks want to add from the OHCS team? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think all of these are, I think all of the chats will consider input broadly, and I think we'll have, I think balancing the MWSB and COVID certified, and how we layer that into all of our so our traditional MWSB priority and our strategy there is really designed on the project operations. And so this is a different lens of it, thinking around who we are funding. And so I think we'll have some, other, I think gathering this input as part of that, and then kind of working that through our MWSB and Claudia's kind of ushering and strategizing around that broad MWSB work will make sense. I appreciate all of the flags of connection there.
Great. Let's go to the next slide, Carolyn. And I would just want to make sure that we didn't miss any of the questions in the chat. A pre-qualification question in the chat: is the pre-qualification for the entire team or the individual members? Could contractor architect be drawn from a list of pre-qualified so that the lead developer can assemble a team for a variety of projects?
Yeah, this is Britt. I think that's actually what we want to ask for feedback on. I think that's sort of up in the air. We know that Minnesota qualifies each member of the team individually. There's a separate qualification form and process for each member. So that question is exactly what we would love to hear feedback on.
Great. Kind of a segue into preparing for the breakout rooms, but do want to offer a live moment here for anyone. Please feel free to raise your hand if you've been holding some questions that you want to clarify before we move into those small group spaces. So please don't hesitate to ask your clarifying questions. Or we may be ready to go into breakout rooms. Y'all did such a great job on your presentations. And folks maybe are ready to jump in and do some smaller group discussions. So with that, we do have 3 breakout rooms, And we're looking as much as we can to have, a balance in those rooms. So many of you indicated you're interested in pre-development at the beginning. We'll need to kind of balance that out with some of these other rooms so that we can try to foster an environment where people are able to contribute a little more easily instead of having 80 people in the pre-development room.